Have you ever wondered why the rate of deadly force used by police can be so wildly different from one place to another? Well, today we're going to dig into a really important 1977 study by two researchers, Richard Kanya and Wade Mackey, who tried to answer that exact question. And let me tell you, their findings completely flipped the script on what everyone thought they knew about the roots of police violence. So let's break down how they got there.
So check this out. The whole investigation really kicks off with this one startling piece of data. Between 1961 and 1970, the state of Georgia had a rate of police-caused homicides that was nearly 13 times higher than New Hampshire's. I mean, think about that. 13 times. This wasn't some small statistical blip. It was a massive chasm. So what on earth could explain a difference that huge?
And that, right there, is the exact question that drove Kanya and Mackey's research. They argue that any theory about police violence worth its salt had to be able to explain this kind of variation. It just wasn't enough to say police are violent. They needed to figure out why police were so much more violent in some places compared to others.
Okay, so where do you even start with a question that big? Well, the researchers did what any good detective would do. They started by looking at the usual suspects, the most common explanations at the time, which all pointed the finger directly at the police force itself.
There were two big ideas on the table. The first one was psychological. It basically suggested that, hey, maybe the job of a police officer just attracts a certain kind of person, someone with a personality already prone to aggression. The second idea was the occupational norm theory. This one argued that police departments themselves create these internal subcultures, the whole blue wall of silence, where using force becomes normalized and even expected.
But here's the problem Kanya and Mackey spotted, and it's a huge one. These theories just don't hold up. Think about it. If police work everywhere attracted the same kinds of people, or if all police departments had similar internal cultures, then you'd expect the rates of police violence to be pretty much the same everywhere. But as we just saw with Georgia and New Hampshire, they were worlds apart. Clearly, something else had to be going on.
So, with those police-focused theories coming up short, the researchers decided to look for answers outside the precinct. This led them to investigate a much broader, more sociological idea called the class conflict model.
So what is the class conflict model? Well, it basically suggests that police act as agents for the powerful in society to control the less powerful. If this theory is true, you would expect to see more police violence in places with more inequality and more socioeconomic tension. And the great thing about this idea is that it gave them a really clear hypothesis they could actually go out and test with real-world data.
And at first, it looked like they were onto something. When they crunched the numbers, they found what looked like a really promising clue. There was a statistically significant correlation, meaning the connection was way too strong to just be a coincidence. It seemed that the bigger a state's welfare population was, the higher its rate of police-caused homicides.
Okay, so that seems like a pretty strong link, right? But Kanya and Mackey were good scientists. They knew they had to push it further. If class conflict was really the main driver, you shouldn't just see a link with poverty markers, but with actual, outright expressions of that conflict, right?
And this is where that whole theory just slammed into a brick wall. They looked at states that had experienced major urban riots back in 1967. I mean, you can't get a clearer sign of social conflict than that. And what did they find? Nothing. Zilch. There was absolutely no significant relationship. So the class conflict model, just like the others, was turning out to be an incomplete puzzle.
So, faced with all these dead ends, Kanya and Mackey did something pretty radical for the time. They decided that to really understand police behavior, they had to stop looking just at the police or just at inequality. They had to zoom way out and start looking at, well, pretty much everything.
They massively broadened their investigation into what they called the societal matrix. And when I say they looked at everything, I mean everything. They analyzed dozens of different variables across 7 different areas of life in each state. Stuff like birth rates, high school graduation rates, even the percentage of families that didn't own a car or a TV. They were basically trying to build a complete cultural DNA profile for every single state.
And the results that came back were frankly stunning. It wasn't just 1 or 2 things that were connected to police violence. It was practically everything. From birth rates to car ownership, almost every single characteristic they measured showed a significant link. It was as if this issue was woven into the entire social fabric of a community.
Okay, so lots of things were connected. But the researchers' next job was to figure out which of these threads was pulling the hardest. They needed to find the most powerful predictors, the real smoking guns in all this data. After sifting through all of that data, 2 factors emerged with connections so powerful they were impossible to ignore.
The absolute best predictors of police-caused homicides were, number 1, the community's own public homicide rate, and number 2, the rate at which police officers were directly exposed to violent crime on the job. The statistical link here wasn't just significant, it was overwhelming.
This chart really makes it crystal clear. The researchers used a tool to measure predictive power. You can think of it like this. If you had to guess a state's rate of police violence, and you could only know one other fact about that state, which fact would help you guess most accurately? Well, knowing how often cops face violent crime gave you an almost 79% predictive edge. Knowing the public homicide rate gave you a 68% edge. But knowing the welfare rate? That only gave you a 28% edge. The message was unmistakable. The general level of violence in a community was a way better predictor of police violence than its level of poverty.
So with these incredibly powerful findings, Kanya and Mackey basically had to throw out all the old models. They proposed a brand new theory, one that shifted the focus away from the individual police officer and onto the world they have to navigate every single day.
And this quote from their paper really gets to the heart of it. The core of their argument is that police officers are adaptive. They learn from the environment they work in. So if they're policing a community where violence is a common way to solve problems, the officer will be more likely to use violence too.
Their model really just breaks down into a simple 3-step process. Step 1, cops get to know their beats, their communities really well. Step 2, they watch and learn how people in that community handle conflict. And step 3, over time, their own behavior on the job starts to adapt and mirror those community norms they see every day. They essentially become a reflection of the world they're policing.
So here's the most crucial and honestly the most radical takeaway from this entire 1977 study. In this view, police violence isn't necessarily a police problem. It's not a sign of a flawed personality or a broken department. Instead, Kanya and Mackey proposed it's a culturally determined behavior that reflects the environment in which an officer works.
And that leaves us with a really provocative and challenging question that people are still debating today. Is it possible that the key to understanding and maybe even reducing police violence lies not just in reforming police departments, but in addressing the broader cultural norms of the very communities they are sworn to protect?